Welcome to Volume 5 of the Video Guide to British Birds. This new edition includes more moving footage than ever before and a brand new commentary written specially to fit the pictures and sound recordings. The net result is a complete guide to bird identification, explained in a way impossible with any other medium. This tape covers British species in systematic order, starting with tits and ending with buntings. It therefore includes a variety of land birds, from the versatile and colourful tits, the often unpopular crows, the rare and exciting shrikes, to the seed-eating species with stout bills, such as sparrows, finches, and buntings. For a detailed list of contents, please refer to the card that comes with each tape. Notice that each species is given a reference number, corresponding to the one shown here. This number tells you the overall length of the bird in centimetres, from the tip of its bill to the end of its tail. The names shown on the screen are those recommended for international use by the British Ornithologists' Union. In the commentary, however, I've continued to use the traditional names, more familiar to most British birdwatchers. The clear and detailed illustrations by Alan Harris show the different plumages of each species at rest and in flight. The commentary concentrates on how to identify each species in the field, pointing out features which can be seen and heard as you view the footage of each bird. In trying to describe the rich variety of bird calls and song, I've often resorted to making my own imitations of these sounds. These are usually hopelessly unlike the real thing, but I hope you'll still find them useful. Think of them as translations of natural bird sounds into noises which any human, even me, can imitate and remember. The distribution of each species is shown by on-screen maps. Green shows areas where the species is present throughout the year, yellow shows where it is only found in summer, and blue shows the areas visited in winter. The distribution of very rare visitors is shown in grey. Now, let's begin this volume with bearded tit. Bearded tits are lively, colourful characters, performing as both clowns and acrobats in the reed beds of eastern England. The adults have a warm brown plumage with a distinctive long trailing tail and black and white lines down the wings. Juveniles can be almost orange coloured, with much more black on their backs. However, it is the males which attract the most attention, with their blue-grey heads and ridiculous Groucho moustaches. Bearded tits can be difficult to spot, but their ching, ching, ching calls will tell you exactly where to look. Only about 400 pairs of bearded tits breed in England, but since these are concentrated into certain reed beds, it isn't difficult to locate them in popular reserves such as Minsmere, Cley, Titchwell and Blacktoft Sands. Long-tailed tit. Long-tailed tits are also delightful birds to encounter, swinging through the trees in tight, noisy groups. Their appearance, like a tiny fluffy ball with a great long black and white tail, is quite unmistakable. The impending arrival of a flock is always announced by their calls. Their CCC notes are similar to those of many other small birds, but their stuttering notes are quite diagnostic. Long-tailed tits are common birds throughout lowland England, wherever woods, hedges and bushes provide a dense shrub layer. Marsh tit. The marsh tit is not a bird of marshes at all, but is most likely to be found in mature deciduous woodland or parkland. Its pattern of black cap, white cheeks and brown back is found in only one other British bird, the very similar willow tit. The marsh tit is, however, the smarter, neater, slimmer of the two, with a glossy black cap and short, neat black bib, altogether a more dapper-looking bird. A much better way to identify them, though, is by their calls, especially the diagnostic pshoo, pshoo, like a loud explosive sneeze. Pshoo. The marsh tit has a loud ringing song more reminiscent of a nuthatch than a tit. Marsh tits are quite common woodland birds in southern England and Wales, but as you go further north they become more patchily distributed, with hardly any north of the Scottish border. Willow tit. The willow tit is so similar to the marsh tit that it wasn't recognised as a separate species until 1900. Unlike the marsh tit, it excavates its own nest hole, so it needs a strong head and neck as well as the soft timber which is found in damp woodland and willow carr. This explains why the willow tit looks thicker necked than the marsh tit. It also has a more untidy black bib and usually a pale panel in the wing. To clinch identification, just listen for the nasal calls. The song is a melancholy repeated whistle. Willow tits are quite common throughout most of England and Wales, except the southwest and northwest. They are absent from most of Scotland. Crested tit. By walking in the Caledonian pine forests of northeast Scotland, you should soon encounter this chirpy little tit, trilling noisily as it comes to inspect you at closer quarters. Its black and white striped face and delicately marked, upwardly pointing crest make this delightful bird quite unmistakable. Some of its calls could be mistaken for a coal tit, but once it makes that indignant trill, you know it can't be anything else. Less than 1,000 pairs are present in Scotland, with most of these found in Speyside and woodlands further north. Crested tits seem to need areas of pine forest, which still have a dense undergrowth of heather. Curiously, this habitat is plentiful in Deeside, the next valley to Speyside, and yet there are no cresties there. Coal tit. The coal tit is another perky little character, found mainly but not exclusively in coniferous woodland. Several species of tit have a bold black and white face pattern, but only the coal tit has this neat white stripe down its nape. The cold grey back colour is another distinguishing feature. Coal tits are more often heard than seen, so it is worth remembering that it often says its own name. Cootie, cootie. Another characteristic note is very twangy, almost like a siskin. It has a variety of loud, repetitive songs, not unlike the great tit, but thinner and with more ts rather than ch. Coal tits occur throughout Britain and are relatively common, especially to the north and west. They are often the most conspicuous birds in coniferous woodland, but they'll also breed in birch and oak woods. They are usually rather rare in suburban gardens. Blue tit. The blue tit is a real bird table favourite, colourful and acrobatic, and often amenable to choosing garden nest boxes to breed in. The striking blue on the wings, tail, and especially on the crown make the blue tit an easy bird to identify. It is also the only British tit, apart from crested, to have a dark stripe through the eye, a feature by which the yellower juveniles can be identified. Blue tit calls are generally weaker and less strident than the great tit and coal tit, and many phrases are stuttered. The song, like a high-pitched, prolonged receptionist's bell, is characteristic of leafless woodland in early spring. The blue-tit is one of the 10 commonest and most widespread birds in Britain, although it generally gets more scarce as you travel further north. It seems happy in all habitats, wherever there are trees. Great tit. The notorious variety of calls and songs produced by great tits still confuse many birdwatchers, both novice and expert. Apparently, when a great tit produces several different songs, other great tits seem to respond as if there are several songsters present. At any rate, they are more likely to keep away from that bird's territory. In great tits, the typical black and white face pattern is embellished by a broad black stripe, which runs from the throat down the middle of the bright yellow belly. This characteristic black and yellow pattern is boldest on the males and duller on the females, but is still visible even on the juveniles. The loud, ringing, teacher, teacher song of the great tit is easily remembered, but most of its other sounds are similarly bold and strident, with regular repetition. Though not quite as common as the blue tit, the great tit is almost equally widespread, occurring in similar habitats, including gardens. Nuthatch. There are several European birds which scramble about on tree trunks, but only the nuthatch with its unusually strong feet can actually walk head first downwards. Nuthatches are quite unmistakable, with their short-tailed, big-headed, fat-bellied shape, even if you don't see the blue-grey back, orangey underparts and long black eye stripe. Like great tits, they utter a variety of loud, ringing, repetitive cries, but those of the nuthatch have a fuller, more rounded quality, with characteristic chucks. Nuthatches are widespread birds of mature woodland, parks and large gardens. They are most numerous in the south and west of England and Wales, but effectively absent from Scotland, Ireland, and most of Humberside, Lincolnshire and the Fens. Tree creeper. The tree creeper is like a feathered mouse, which discreetly climbs in spirals up the trunk of one tree before flying down to start on the next one. Its speckled brown plumage provides excellent camouflage, but the silvery white underparts usually give it away. Other features to look for are its long pale eye stripes, slender down-curved bill, and black-edged golden wing bar, sometimes glimpsed as it flies. To find tree creepers, you should listen for their calls. The usual tss, 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 at regular intervals evokes for me an image of a bird going up a tree trunk in stages. The thin sibilant song is surprisingly far-carrying, rising to a crescendo, as if getting increasingly impatient. Tree creepers are widespread woodland birds throughout Britain and Ireland, but usually visit only the largest of gardens. Golden oriole. Male golden orioles are spectacularly colourful, but if it wasn't for their distinctive, far-carrying songs, they could easily be overlooked. The adult male is unmistakable, startlingly yellow, apart from jet black wings and tail and a blood-red beak. The female is greener and streaked below, distinctive enough when seen perched, but having similar colours to a green woodpecker in flight. The oriole, though, is smaller, with blacker, more pointed wings and yellow corners to the tail. The fluty song is easily remembered, often described as woola-wee-oo, woola-wee-oo. A soft, rasping, jay-like call is almost equally useful in locating these elusive birds. The golden oriole is now established as a regular British breeding bird, with a population between 10 and 40 pairs. Most of these breed in the fens of East Anglia, where they show a preference for poplar plantations. In addition, migrants could turn up almost anywhere, especially near the east coast in spring. Great grey shrike. Great grey shrikes are scarce but regular winter visitors to Britain, more numerous in some years than others. They usually sit conspicuously on the tops of bushes or posts, scanning for prey such as rodents and small birds. They are conspicuously white underneath, pearl grey above, with mostly black wings and a long, mostly black tail. Once again they have a striking black mask through the eye. Their call is disappointingly weak and rasping. The song, rarely heard in this country, often includes distinctive, dripping water sounds. Great grey shrikes prefer open, bushy areas, such as forest clearings or heaths. They occur most frequently in eastern Britain, almost annually on some heaths in East Anglia. Red-backed shrike. Despite its small size, scarcely bigger than a bullfinch, the red-backed shrike is a fierce predator with a hooked beak capable of taking small birds and rodents. Its habit of impaling surplus victims on thorns has given it the colloquial name of butcher bird. The male is unmistakably colourful, with a red back, mostly black tail, blue-grey rump and head, and a characteristic black highwayman's mask. Females and juveniles are duller brown, but still have the heavy beak and a suggestion of a mask. Most importantly, they have prominently scaly underparts. Red-backed shrikes produce loud, scolding, chat-like calls. They have a surprisingly rich warbling song. Sadly, red-backed shrikes are now unlikely to be heard singing in Britain because this once common summer visitor is now virtually extinct here. However, it still occurs as a regular migrant, especially juvenile birds on the east coast in late August. Jay. Jays have always been shy, secretive woodland birds, except in autumn when they fly conspicuously to and fro, gathering vast numbers of acorns. More recently, though, they have spread into parks, gardens, and even urban areas. Jays are splendidly colourful birds. The colour of their body parts almost defies description, but the patch at the bend of the wing is unmistakably blue. The smirking black moustache and black and white flecked crown gives them a comical appearance. In flight, the wings show black and white as well as blue, but it's the broad white rump patch which is most conspicuous. They are easily located by their harsh, grating calls. Don't worry, that isn't really the sound of an animal being strangled. The jay is a common woodland bird, especially in the southeast of England, becoming scarcer further north, as far as Scotland, where it's absent from many areas. Magpie. The proliferation of magpies, especially in urban and suburban areas, has created widespread belief that the songbirds in our gardens will get wiped out by these invading nasties. In fact, it has been shown that magpies will have a far less significant impact on garden birds than, say, domestic cats. Remember that songbirds produce lots of young, often in several broods, and so a high level of mortality is inevitable and not necessarily detrimental to their overall numbers. So don't condemn the magpie, just enjoy it. See if you can see the green and blue gloss in its immaculate black and white plumage. See if you can work out what is happening when you see a group of magpies together. These are usually territorial disputes involving much posturing and chasing. The magpie's cackling call is very familiar. There are thought to be almost 1 million pairs of magpies already in Britain and Ireland, although they're still absent from most of the Scottish Highlands and Islands. They occur almost everywhere where trees are present, unless they're systematically wiped out by gamekeepers. In the absence of trees, they have even taken to nesting on pylons. Chough. The chough is really a bird of rocky mountains, but in Britain it is sea cliffs and slate quarries which provide sites where you can watch their swooping, tumbling, acrobatic flights. The chough is closest to a jackdaw in size, but is slightly bigger with a longer, more pointed head and longer, more rectangular, more deeply fingered wings. At closer range, of course, the long, down-curved red bill and the red feet are diagnostic. The name of the chough is supposed to be derived from its call, but this takes a little imagination. However, its penetrating cha call is distinctively lighter, more airy than the calls of jackdaws. Although it is widespread around the west coast of Ireland, the chough is limited to about 300 pairs in Britain. All of these are in West Wales, the Isle of Man and the Isle of Islay in Scotland. Carrion crow. Carrion crows don't occur in such high densities as rooks, but they have adapted to a much greater variety of habitats, from busy towns to secluded moorlands. The carrion crow is completely dark in all plumages, and generally looks tidier than a rook, without the baggy trousers or fluffy forehead. The bill is shorter and deeper, and the top edge of the upper mandible clearly curves downwards towards the tip. In flight, crows have broader wings, more rectangular tails, and a slower, steadier wing beat. Their calls are deeper, sounding more like caw than caw. Carrion crows are found throughout Britain, although in northwest Scotland and Ireland they occur as hooded crows. These are the same species, but they look different due to their mainly grey bodies. Birds with intermediate amounts of grey, for example black backs but grey bellies, are hybrids between the two forms. Rook. A rook on its own is a crow, and a crow in a crowd is a rook. That's not a bad rule of thumb, but if you don't look more carefully, you'll make many mistakes. Adult rooks are easily recognised by the pale whitish-grey patches around the base of their bills. However, birds which are less than a year old have all dark faces and bills, and so look more like carrion crows. Young rooks have longer, narrower, straighter bills than crows, with a steep forehead which creates a peaked crown. Their shaggy trousers are also distinctive. In flight, rooks are slimmer than crows, with narrower wings, a longer head, and a longer, slimmer tail, which gets broader towards the tip. Their tree-top rookeries resound to the calls of "ha!", higher in pitch than crow calls. Rooks breed throughout Britain, seemingly wherever there are tall trees for nesting, in proximity to arable farmland on which they feed. They are absent from many upland areas and large conurbations, notably London. Jackdaw. The jackdaw is our smallest crow, an engaging character which is frequently encountered by humans, either squabbling on rooftops or scavenging around car parks. It is easily recognised at close range by an obvious grey shawl around the nape, which makes the face and forehead look conspicuously black. In flight, it is smaller, with shorter, more rounded and quicker-paced wings than other crows, sometimes seeming almost pigeon-like. Flocks of jackdaws usually maintain a stream of conversational noises, in which the characteristic ringing "chack" can always be heard. Jackdaws nest in holes, so their colonies tend to be concentrated on cliffs, inland or coastal, or buildings, or rotten old trees in mature woodland or parkland. They are somewhat patchily distributed throughout Britain, but absent from much of the Highlands. Raven. The sight of a raven, a big beefy crow, brings pleasure to bird watchers, but not to hill farmers, who tell authenticated stories of ravens pecking out the eyes of sheep while they are helplessly giving birth. The raven is completely black, like a carrion crow, and its greater size may not be obvious from a distance. It must therefore be recognised by differences in shape. The big, deep bill, big head and shaggy mane of a raven are distinctive at rest and partly in flight, when the long diamond-shaped tail is more convincing. In flight, the long head and long tail give the raven the appearance of a Maltese cross in the sky. The gruff "wah, wah" call of a raven is often heard before the bird is seen. Ravens are found throughout the year, in mountains and coastal areas in western Britain, but rarely elsewhere. Starling. Although the starling is one of the most numerous and ubiquitous British birds, reaching pest proportions in some places, the sight of great clouds of them wheeling around in front of a winter sunset is still one of birdwatching's great thrills. Sadly, such pleasures may soon be just a memory, since there has been a dramatic decline in the parts of northern Europe which these wintering birds come from. Starlings have mainly black bodies and yellow bills like blackbirds, but they are smaller and fatter, with more pointed heads and longer, more pointed wings. Their plumage is always speckled, although in summer the markings on the breast are replaced by iridescent tones of green and blue. Juveniles start off as plain brown with a black bill and characteristic shape. Starlings sing spectacular twittering songs, full of squeaks, clicks, whistles, and mimicry, which extends to the sounds of mobile phones or even car alarms. Starlings are almost universally abundant, except in parts of Western Britain and the Highlands, but there are signs of local decreases, which suggest that the British population could also be on the verge of a spectacular crash. Let's hope not. Tree sparrow. If you want to catch out a budding young birdwatcher, ask him or her what a female tree sparrow looks like. It's a very difficult question, unless they've already worked out that they just look like a male tree sparrow. This species is smaller and usually brighter looking than a house sparrow, with a rich chestnut brown crown and a neat black spot in their clean white cheeks. Their calls are recognisably sparrow-like, but are typically more abrupt. Chup, chup. Tree sparrows are very much birds of hedgerows and scattered woodland, rather than towns and buildings, nesting mainly in holes in trees. They are widespread throughout much of England, but absent or highly localised in Scotland, Wales, Ireland and southwest England. They have declined markedly in many areas since the 1960s. House sparrow. Of course, we're all familiar with the common or garden house sparrow, but have you ever taken the trouble to watch one displaying? To seduce a female, the male hops in circles around her, fluffing up his feathers, flapping his wings and chirping constantly. Occasionally he stops, as if looking for a response, but if she just sits impassively, he sets off again on his energetic circuits until eventually she submits. Male house sparrows are easily recognised by their grey crowns and variably sized black bibs, but females might be much more difficult. They are, however, the only dull brown birds with thick conical bills like a finch and completely unstreaked underparts. The familiar chirping call of the house sparrow can be heard from almost every kitchen and bedroom in the country. Sparrows occur throughout Britain, virtually wherever there are buildings, although they have been known to take over the nests of martins or build twiggy nests in bushes. There are signs that house sparrows are disappearing from some upland areas, especially in Scotland, so, as with the starling, a national decline may be imminent. Chaffinch. The chaffinch can make a strong claim to be Britain's commonest bird, since it is capable of nesting at much higher densities than the blackbird and isn't seriously affected by harsh winters like the wren. The male chaffinch is distinctively coloured, especially in spring when the dull outer edges of his feathers wear away to reveal the striking blue head and pink breast below. In all plumages, though, chaffinches are easily told by their unique combination of two broad white wing bars and obvious white outer tail feathers. Their songs are famously variable, with birds from each region using their own dialect, but the standard pattern is a sequence of strong rising notes followed by a collapsing flourish. Chip 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 drip jew. Chip 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 drip jew. They have many calls, including the standard pink, pink pink, and a soft given in flight. But listen too for the so-called rain call, and see if it really does predict rain. Chaffinches occur in almost every area where there are trees and bushes, but they are usually scarcer in urban or moorland habitats. They are invariably one of the commonest birds on lowland farms and in most woodlands, and are regular scavengers at car parks. Brambling. The brambling is sometimes described as the chaffinch of the north, for in the pine and birch forests of Scandinavia it seems to replace the chaffinch as the commonest bird. In Britain, though, it is almost exclusively a winter visitor. In all plumages, bramblings can be recognised by the obvious orange on the breast, extending across the shoulders onto their wings. In winter, the head and mantle are usually a blotchy grey-brown, but in some birds these wear away to produce a stunning black head, even before they depart back to Scandinavia. In flight, they show a neat rectangular white patch down the rump, as well as white and orange in the wing. They are often located by their abrupt but wheezy flight calls. Dre, dre. Their song sounds like a really fed-up greenfinch. Dre, dre, tailing off at the end. However, this is rarely heard in Britain, since summering bramblings are exceptionally rare. In winter, numbers vary considerably from year to year. In a good winter, flocks of several hundred may be found in hedgerows, or better still, in woodlands where lots of beech mast is available. At certain times they may also visit garden bird tables. Serin. The frenzied song of the serin is such a familiar summer sound in the parks and gardens of continental Europe that it seems strange that this bird has never had more than a toehold in Britain. Indeed, toenail hold would be more descriptive. In all plumages, serins are short, dumpy, thick-necked, small-billed finches with heavily streaked underparts. The lemon yellow of a male's head is unmistakable, but females and immatures show much less yellow, except perhaps on the rump. The lack of yellow in the wing would confirm that they were neither siskins nor greenfinches. If you do see a different-looking yellowish bird, make a careful note of its details to prove that it is a wild serin, not an escaped cage bird. Serins have a distinctive jingling flight call. A singing male takes this same sound, speeds it up and extends it into a long, frantic twittering outburst, sometimes described as like grinding up pieces of glass. Serins have occasionally tried to breed in southern England, but more typically they occur as scarce migrants, usually in spring. Greenfinch. The greenfinch is a familiar garden bird, since it was one of the first species to master the knack of feeding from red peanut bags. The male can be quite conspicuously green, but in females and juveniles this may not be so obvious. Such birds can still be identified, though, by the pale yellow panels in the closed primaries, and in the sides of the tail. Greenfinches perform two types of song. One is a harsh, nasal drrrr, monotonously repeated. The other is an extension of their hard, twittery flight call, developed into extended bursts and interspersed with softer notes. This is produced whilst performing delightful, stiff-winged, dancing flights over and around a hedgerow, rather like a butterfly. The greenfinch is widespread throughout Britain, usually around farms, villages and towns. Goldfinch. These delightful little birds are so attractive that the collective noun for a group of goldfinches is a charm. They are easily identified by their striking colours, red, black and white on the head and black and gold in the wings. Juvenile birds have a plain brown head, but the broad gold stripe through the black wings is already obvious. The wing pattern is so vivid that many bird watchers don't realise that the goldfinch also has a white rump. Goldfinches produce liquid, swittery calls, sometimes enigmatically described as tinsely. Such calls are sometimes elaborated into a song which is prolonged and energetic. Goldfinches are now widespread in Britain, breeding in almost all areas except the Scottish Highlands. In autumn, many British goldfinches migrate southwards, and so they become much scarcer in winter, largely absent from northern England and Scotland. They occur in areas of grassland, scrub and parkland, with access to weeds such as dandelions and thistles. Twite. The twite is a classic little brown bird, which is surely overlooked by many birdwatchers, especially if they don't know its call. The twite looks very much like a juvenile linnet, since it has the same white panels in the wing and tail. In winter, though, the twite is easily distinguished, since it has a bright, pale, horn-coloured bill, which stands out against an otherwise dark head. Only in certain lights will the bill of a linnet look pale. In summer, the twite's bill is darker, so you must rely on more subtle features. The twite is generally darker and drabber than a linnet, with a neater pale bar across the wing and a plainer face and throat, with hardly any evidence of dark and light moustachial lines. Summer is also the time when the pink rump of the male twite is most obvious. They are supposed to say their name when they call, a twangy twai, twai. This distinctive sound will help to identify birds flying over, or distant singing birds and flocks. The twite is a bird of mountains and moorlands, and is hence sometimes called the mountain linnet. It's widespread in the Scottish Highlands and parts of the Pennines, but scarce or absent from most other upland areas. The breeding birds move to lower ground in winter, and large flocks can gather, especially by estuaries and salt marshes. Linnet. The old cock linnet is a familiar sight in the British countryside, sitting on wires or the tops of bushes, singing heartily and showing off his pink breast. In summer plumage, the male also has a powder blue head, a red forehead, and a rich reddish-brown back. In all other plumages, though, the red disappears, and the other colours are more subdued, though still faintly discernible. Key features, though, are the white edges to the feathers which create wing panels in the primaries and at the base of the tail. The only other bird to show this pattern is the twite, but the linnet also has a greyer head, patterned throat, and dark bill. In flight, the linnet shows a series of white lines along the primaries, again matched only by twite. The linnet has a lively twittering call, which is accelerated and expanded during the enthusiastic song. The linnet is widespread and still numerous as a breeding bird throughout Britain, especially in the east and around the coasts, where it breeds colonially on gorse-covered heaths. Other potential habitats include hedgerows and scrubby thickets. It's often less numerous in winter, especially in upland areas. Siskin. The colourful siskin has proved to be a real opportunist, taking advantage not only of the red peanut bags which became popular in gardens, but also of the proliferation of mature conifer plantations, which has allowed the British breeding population to multiply tenfold in the last 20 years. Siskins in all plumages show obvious green or yellow markings, but can be told from greenfinches or serins by the obvious yellow bars across the mainly black wings. Males have obviously yellow and black faces, but the females are duller and more heavily streaked. Juveniles are streaked like females, but duller and browner. Siskins can be easily located by their light, springy, or even twangy calls. P'tween, p'tween. Their fast, lively, joyous songs, with frequent uses of the call notes, are performed with exhilarating gusto. Siskins are widespread winter visitors throughout Britain, with a love of damp woodlands and riversides where they feed on birch and alder catkins. In late winter, when such food becomes scarce, siskins switch to feeding in gardens. They can also be found in conifer plantations, where they frequently stay to breed. Such breeding populations now exist throughout much of Scotland, Wales, the New Forest and parts of northern England. Bullfinch. The bright red underparts of a male bullfinch can provide a rare splash of colour on a grey winter's day, but their habit of destroying fruit tree buds means they are not universally popular. Bullfinches are big, fat finches, which can most easily be identified by their neat, jet-black caps or their obvious square white rumps, as if the base of the tail has been wrapped in white bandage. Females are browner than males, lacking the red front and grey back. Juveniles lack the black cap, but can still be told by their fat, bull-necked appearance and short but very deep black bill, as well as the conclusive white rump. Bullfinches can be very secretive, so it's important to learn their thin piping call. Their wheezy song is hardly ever heard. Bullfinches are widespread throughout Britain, numerous in the south but getting progressively scarcer towards the Scottish Highlands. They are likely to be found wherever there are dense bushes or trees, so woodlands, copses, thickets and hedgerows all suffice. Redpoll. The redpoll is a small, streaky brown finch, usually located by its loud rattling call. Redpolls can usually be identified by the little red spot on the forehead, which gives them their name. In females, however, this red colour can be indistinct, and in juveniles it can be lacking altogether. Such birds would have to be identified by their small size, chunky shape, and streaky dark brown plumage, lacking the greens and yellows of serines or siskins, or the white in the wing and tail of a linnet or twite. The typical call always includes a hard, well-defined j-j-j, j-j-j, as well as strong, almost trilling rattles. Redpolls are widespread throughout Britain, but relatively scarce and declining in central and southern England. They are particularly numerous in birch woodlands, but are often also found in conifer plantations. In winter they occur more commonly in England, with a liking for alders and willows, in riversides and lake shores. Crossbill. The crossbill is something of a parrot of the pine forests. Their stout build, clumsy-looking beaks, and habits of sidling along branches or pecking at pine cones while they hold them in one foot are all distinctively parrot-like. Crossbills are slightly bigger but distinctly fatter looking than, say, chaffinches, and have big bills with pointed mandibles crossed at the tips. The males are brick red on the head, back and underparts, the females more of a dark browny green with an obvious yellow rump. Juveniles are grey-brown and heavily streaked, but lacking white or yellow in the wing or tail. Their bills are initially uncrossed, but are still far too stout to allow any confusion with, say, redpoll. Crossbills are often located by their heavy calls. Chip, 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 chip. Crossbills are eruptive birds, which means they come and go from year to year, depending on the food supply. In a good year, they might be found in conifer plantations scattered all over Britain, but especially in Scotland and northern England, Wales, the Brecks and the New Forest. They are only likely to be found in coniferous woodlands, since cone seeds are virtually their only source of food. Scottish crossbill. For some time, birdwatchers weren't sure whether the crossbills breeding in Scotland were common crossbills or the rarer, larger parrot crossbills which breed in Scandinavia and beyond. Careful observations showed that really these Scottish birds were intermediate in size between the two, fed mainly on pines rather than spruces or larches, and didn't interbreed with common crossbills in the same area. The Scottish crossbill was therefore declared as a separate species, the only one which breeds in Britain and nowhere else. The trouble is, though, that these birds are so similar to common crossbills that most birdwatchers can't tell them apart. In theory, the Scottish crossbill has a heavier, more parrot-like bill, recalling crossed secateurs rather than crossed scissors, and in some birds this is obvious. However, a large-billed common crossbill or a small-billed Scottish crossbill can be impossible to identify with confidence. The calls of Scottish crossbills are, to most people, inseparable from those of common crossbills. Scottish crossbills occur only in the Caledonian pine forests of northern Scotland. The pine seeds on which they feed are reliably available every year, and so they don't erupt but remain resident in Scotland. Hawfinch. The hawfinch is one of our most elusive birds, spending much of its time in the tops of trees and disappearing when humans are still some distance away. To find them, you have to learn their ticking calls, know where to look, and be able to approach without alarming them. As finches go, this is a real monster, almost as big as a redwing, and with a huge bill capable of cracking cherry stones. They are basically orangey brown in plumage, with one massive white wing bar and white tip to the tail. The bill is grey-black in summer, horn-coloured in winter, and has a distinctive black surround. The commonest call is a sharp, explosive, metallic reminding me of a ring pull being flicked against the top of a can. Hawfinches are resident birds, but move around locally. They are found most frequently in southeast England, with scattered pockets of relative abundance elsewhere in Britain as far north as Perth. They occur almost exclusively in mature woodland and parkland, and show a definite liking for hornbeam, cherries, beech and yew. Lapland bunting. I'm sorry, but I just can't bring myself to call the Lapland bunting the Lapland longspur. It's a bunting which is very common in Lapland, so I see no reason to change to an American name. Lapland buntings are most distinctive in summer plumage, especially the males with their black, white and chestnut heads. In winter, though, they could easily be mistaken for reed buntings, but notice the two white wing bars sandwiching an obvious rusty red wing patch, and the black eye standing out in a plain face, with a black surround to the pale ear coverts. The yellow bill and bigger, more lark-like proportions are also useful. Winter males additionally have a rusty nape and black speckles across the breast. Lapland buntings are often located by their calls. Tick-a-tick-chew, tick-a-tick-chew. Lapland buntings are scarce winter and passage visitors, usually found in small numbers at a few favoured coastal sites, in fields, salt marsh, or on the edges of beaches. Snow bunting. The sight of a flock of snow buntings tumbling down to rest, with their white wings flashing, makes it obvious why they are sometimes given the country name of snowflakes. In winter, some snow buntings can look surprisingly drab on the ground, but most show rather gingery brown colours with variable amounts of white, visible on bellies and wings and around their faces. In summer plumage, though, the whole head and underparts of the male become startlingly white. In flight, the whole inner wing is white on a male, but this pale panel is smaller on a female and even less obvious on some immatures. Their typical call is a short, trilling trip, trip, and the occasional stew, stew. Their song reminds me of a twangy dunnock. Snow buntings are scarce winter visitors, although impressive flocks may gather in favoured localities. They usually prefer the edges of shingle beaches at the coast, for example in North Norfolk. Increasing numbers are now breeding on the Scottish mountain tops, where birds can also be seen in winter, for example scavenging around ski centre car parks. Searle bunting. The Searle bunting is still a British breeding bird, but its position here is now precarious. Around 1970 it was found at over 150 sites throughout southern England, but by 1990 it was confined to only about 25 sites, nearly all in South Devon. Male Searle buntings have diagnostic black and yellow faces. The females show hints of this same black and yellow pattern, including obvious broad black lines behind and below the eye. If you are in doubt about whether you have a Searle bunting or a yellowhammer, check the rump colour. Grey-brown on a Searle bunting, almost red on a yellowhammer. The song is a loud, clear rattle, which could be described as like a strong yellowhammer without the cheese, or like a rather wheezy lesser whitethroat. You're unlikely to see a Searle bunting in Britain, except between Plymouth and Exeter, where they are resident in scrub and farmland near the coast. Yellowhammer. The sound of a yellowhammer singing "Little Bit of Bread and No Cheese" can still be heard throughout most of Britain, but in common with most other buntings, this species is declining. In summer, the males can look as yellow as canaries, but with thin black lines around the face and a rustier breast. Females are duller, but clearly yellow, and the juveniles are duller still, sometimes showing no yellow at all. They can always be told from other streaky brown birds by the combination of a rich chestnut rump and obvious white outer tail feathers. The song is memorable. Little bit of bread and no cheese. The call is a rasping j, j. Yellowhammers are widespread and numerous resident birds everywhere in Britain except on high ground. They have recently disappeared from much of Ireland, and there are signs of local decreases in parts of England. They are a bird of productive farmland, nesting in the hedgerows, thickets and gorsy heaths nearby. Reed bunting. The male reed bunting is an attractive and strikingly plumaged bird, but his song is notoriously boring. In summer, his head is jet black, apart from neat white moustachial streaks. This moustached appearance is quite striking in all reed buntings, even the females and immatures, which otherwise look heavily streaked, rich brown above and dirty white below. Their call is a strong, slurred whistle. Stew. Stew. The reed bunting song is an unenthusiastic, unimaginative j, 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 j. Reed buntings are resident and widespread throughout Britain, especially in lowland areas. They are typically birds of well-vegetated wetlands, especially gravel pits and marshes, but during the 1960s and 70s they became increasingly frequent elsewhere, on moorland and arable farmland, in young conifers and even in gardens, although a recent decline may make such sightings less regular. Corn bunting. The corn bunting is a rather drab, streaky brown bird, with an endlessly tedious song, but it has declined so sharply that already there are parts of Britain where the birdwatchers mourn its disappearance. Corn buntings are bigger and plumper than other buntings, streaky brown in all plumages, with a heavier and more distinctly notched bill. In flight they lack white outer tail feathers, and frequently leave their legs dangling. Their tinny The calls are very distinctive. The corn bunting song is easily remembered as like a jangling bunch of keys. Corn buntings are still widespread in much of England and a few parts of Scotland, and are indeed locally numerous, but already there are great chunks of England where they can no longer be found. There have recently been so many changes in farming practice on their preferred habitat of lowland farms that we can only speculate as to which have caused their demise.